it ran candidates under the People's Party ticket for state legislatures and then for Congress, and it won a good number of these elections, and then it began running for national office. But in 1896, when they, I think, prematurely decided to stop their independent work and support the Democratic Party candidate William Jennings Bryan, who then lost anyway, right? I think at that point the populist movement began to disintegrate. In fact, the turning to a political party from a movement is a very sensitive and dangerous point, because historically the involvement of a movement in politics very often turns out to be the end of that movement if that involvement is premature. And so I think the careful building of this alliance and of a movement in this country, and the moving towards independent candidacy, I think, is a good tactic. And also, I think we should keep one thing in mind, and that is, it is not absolutely necessary to win office yourself in order to change the policies of the national government. When you have a great national movement, and this happened during the Civil Rights Movement, it happened in the anti-war movement in the Vietnam years, it doesn't matter then whether you have a Republican Party in power or a Democratic Party in power. If the movement is large enough, if the public opinion is strong enough, the heads of government are very sensitive to what they perceive as a threat to their power, and they will then respond. Nixon, the Republican, had to respond to what he saw as an overwhelming anti-war movement. Kennedy came into office not planning to do anything about civil rights. He had to respond to the mass demonstrations in Birmingham. And so I think that the process on the way towards independent political party itself, can have an important effect on national policy.
Now, one of the objectives of the alliance is to reduce the destructive influence of corporations over our lives. Now, based upon the difficulties we've had in controlling corporations in the past, the antitrust regulations and so forth, which appear to have all failed, how can they be brought under control and become responsible to the people?
That's a tough one, because that's getting to the heart of the matter. That is the heart of the matter in our society is corporate control of the economy, and the reason it's difficult is that corporations are a power outside the political process. While we have a modicum of democracy in the political process, the possibility of electing candidates, the possibility of pressuring Congress and the president to do certain things, the corporations are outside of that. Corporations are feudal entities. They are little dictatorships. The economy is a command economy, the term we used to use to apply to the Soviet Union. And it's commanded by corporate leaders, more and smaller and smaller group. So I think ultimately the way to begin to bring corporate power under control is by organizing in two different areas. One is in the area of the workplace, where, the only time General Motors and Ford and U.S. Steel began to come under some kind of democratic pressure was when their workers organized. And I think, in other words, direct action in the workplace against the power of the corporations. And the other place is the community, the consumer, the power, the economic power of the boycott. How did here in California, how did the United Farm Workers begin to have some effect on on the corporate control of, agriculture by organizing a national boycott. I mean, corporations respond to economic fear, and so of course, it's hard work.
Can you suggest something that could be done at the local level by an emerging chapter of the Alliance that might be effective here?
Well, I don't know exactly what your local issues are here, but I think the question is the right kind of question, because it's a problem of looking around in a community and seeing sort of what small piece of the larger problem you can work on. Now, well, here in California, the issue of affirmative action has become a very important one. And it seems to me obviously that they're trying to do away with affirmative action in California. It's still an issue, isn't it, in the California educational system, and I think I think it's very important for the Alliance to build its strength and its influence by speaking to the needs of those people who are served by affirmative action: women, minorities, black people, and carry on a campaign on an issue that can be won, because I think that once you address affirmative action in ways that people can understand, and show how historically we've always had affirmative action, except in the other direction. That is, for several hundred years, we've had affirmative action for white males, and all that's being asked is a few years of affirmative action for blacks and women and other people, and it's a matter of restoring a kind of justice. And I think if you make an analogy, for instance, with the GI Bill. The GI Bill was an affirmative action for veterans. Now, people didn't dare to complain against the GI Bill because there was invested with patriotism and the flag and war and all of that. But that was also a situation where we gave an advantage to people we thought had been disadvantaged. And it's the same kind of principle. So I think it's an issue that in which people can be persuaded that it's the right thing to
do. The problems of unemployment, disparity in incomes and in wealth may not be cyclical, but are systemic. As productivity and capital investment puts more people out of work and corporations seek markets everywhere else in the world, how can reducing corporate power result in increased employment opportunities and redistribution of consumer goods?
Well, this question of employment is, I think, absolutely basic to solving the economic problems of the country, and neither party has addressed it. And the Democratic Party comes forward with weak proposals like, well, more training. You can train people and train people and train people. If there are no jobs for them, they're very highly trained people who are losing their jobs these days. What we require is a full employment program.